Before we get started, please review the learning outcomes for this chapter. This chapter will review how healthcare reform has created both barriers and opportunities for advanced practice nursing role, review the application of different leadership frameworks and the theories to advanced practice nursing, and illustrate the use of power, authority, and influence in the advanced practice role. This will distinguish between advanced practice nurses as both entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, and finally, how to use networking and mentoring to advance one's career. The old adage will come to mind: it's not what you know, but who you know. This chapter will basically look at the theoretical frameworks behind the different models of leadership and apply these to modern-day nursing roles in the hopes of making you more successful in your new leadership role as an advanced practice nurse practitioner. There have been many definitions of leadership, and often it is described depending on the leadership theory utilized. Leadership has moved from leader-centered, focusing on the individual, to orientation of mutual power and collaboration. View this as a shared decision-making model. In the industrial age, leadership was more about control and structure. People were more viewed as commodities. Leadership in the post-industrial age requires a different set of skills. Leaders must find new ways of being and interacting for success. In the knowledge worker age, Cove describes the whole person paradigm. In this model, the leader taps into each person and maximizes each individual's contribution to optimize results. View this as a leader being able to help each person maximize their contribution. I think we can all think about a charge nurse or a doctor or even a nurse manager that we've worked with whose one of their greatest abilities is helping each worker not just follow directions but maximize and work at the top of their license. So when I think about this type of leader, the whole person paradigm, I think about the leader who can make the most out of each person they lead. Situation or contingency leadership theories are based on the premise that different styles of leadership are needed in different circumstances. Situation leadership is contingent on subordinate maturity and the situation. For example, telling may occur when there is very low maturity, selling to those with moderate maturity, participating for those with moderately high maturity, and delegation for those with very high maturity. View this in context of your education. Early on in your formative years, your elementary teachers utilized a lot of telling due to your maturity. During junior high and high school, there is more selling. Students are mature enough to participate based on a buy-in, and teachers may change their leadership styles due to increased maturity of their students. Undergraduate education follows more participation in leadership from instructors. And finally, graduate work has delegation. If you think about a graduate level, there is some responsibility on each one of the students to actually bring information to the class. And this is more in your discussion boards, you guys take a more active role as also being co-instructors, and that's delegation. In these different learning environments, the instructor changes their leadership styles and techniques, and it's based on their students' maturity. So basically, the leader is adaptable to those that they are teaching or instructing or leading. Servant leadership is a leader who wants to serve first versus being the leader first. Servant leaders focus on meeting the needs of others and accomplishing the work. Some of the advantages of this model is that it introduces the concept of caring and creates a nurturing environment for the followers. A disadvantage of this form of leadership is that it can be viewed as weak, especially in the connotation of the word servant. However, I feel like in the most upcoming generation that there is more of a swing towards servant leadership. And I think, especially in my role as a teacher, I find that my students are much more apt to follow when I find ways to serve them in their education. So this is one of my favorite types of leadership. Transactional leaders work with their followers to gain some type of exchange for services that are contracted by the leader. A good example of this would be financial incentives for meeting a benchmark goal of the leader. Both parties will benefit from this transaction. Transformation leaders look for the motives of their followers and engage the full person in reaching a mutual purpose. The transformational model places emphasis on the wants and needs of the followers, as opposed to the leader or the situation. Transformational leaders engage others through a shared dream. A good example of this, if you think about companies out there, are Tom's Shoes. This company donates a pair of shoes for every pair sold. Employees may be motivated to increase sales to increase donated pairs, which also benefits the company. Both leader and employee will reach a mutual purpose of increasing sales and donations. Relational leadership can occur in any direction and reflects a mutual agenda between the follower and the leader. This line of thinking requires an inclusiveness of others and their viewpoints, and also the ability to persuade others to your way of thinking. So view this as not just a single role in this model, but teams evolve their own culture. So in this way, as the leader, you are trying to include other people's thoughts, but also persuade them to your way of thinking versus just a forced model. In this model, each individual will bring his or her leadership skill set to the table, and the collective learning and abilities will enable adaptation to complexity. I love this model when you think about the healthcare system, because when we think about complex scenarios, especially when you think about cancer treatments, they do tumor board, right? So this is an example where the head doctor, who'd be like an oncologist, would meet with other doctors and they would discuss. He would bring his own viewpoint, but also include the other viewpoints of others and hopefully be able to persuade them to a good plan of care. But ultimately, when you think of complex treatment plans, bringing many viewpoints in will always create a better plan of care and a better treatment model. So I feel like the more complex the scenario and also the more acute the situation. So when you think about really sick patients, this model is better used. An advanced practice nurse will use this in the leadership skills on their interdisciplinary teams. They'll bring their own expertise to the group and also have to include the expertise of those that they are co-managing the patient with. Let's have a quick moment to just do an information check. Which type of leadership is most effective in a turbulent environment? So a transformational leader, this is the one who can elevate the interests of their followers and their ability to look beyond their own self-interest to that of the group. This type of leadership is more effective in turbulent markets. And in markets, when they're talking about this, these models were used in more of a finance. So they're talking about actually more of leadership styles in the business world, but this can also, I feel like, be applied to healthcare, because when you think about what type of person you want to follow on a turbulent day, it's the type of person who can look at the needs of everybody, looking beyond their own self-interest, and can basically look at the interests of the whole group. So when you think about the charge nurse who's able to staff according to the need of the unit versus what's easiest for them, that makes a big difference. So I do think most of these models were created outside of the healthcare world, but they're very applicable to our world also. Before we move on, I want you to think about your own clinical practice and think of different scenarios that exhibit different leaderships discussed so far in the text and in this lecture. I would like to share with you one of my experiences from my own clinical practice. When I started out as a clinician, I was working at a public health clinic. Most days, I was scheduled 25 to 30 patients in a day. The clinic had several new medical assistants, and it was typically took the MAs or the medical assistants about 45 minutes to room a patient, resulting in me always going home 2 to 3 hours late in a clinic day. I started to think of ways to improve the medical assistants' knowledge base with this thought of if they knew more and they had more educational pieces, that it would shorten their ability to room patients quicker and I'd get home on time. So I started to do educational pieces during the Friday meetings. I was basically trying to sell them on the skills that would facilitate a better flow to our clinic day. I found this did not work. While increased in their knowledge base, they didn't apply it to practice, and it still took them 45 minutes to room a patient. Then I started a transactional approach. If we can get patients roomed on time, then everyone can get a bonus. This was not enough added motivation for our medical assistants. It still took them 45 minutes to room a patient, and I still went home late most days. Finally, one day, I changed my approach. I had finished my patients for the day and was already ready to go when I could see that the medical assistants were behind in their work. Looking at their pace, I could tell that they were about 3 hours out. This day I had a change in approach. I grabbed a mop. I started cleaning with them. I moved fast. And in about 20 minutes, all the rooms were clean. The charts were ready for the next day. The stocking was done, and we could all go home. The next day, I started with the approach of let's get everyone out on time. We all have shared work. I told them that I would stay as long as they needed to, if they could work faster and get me home on time. This was an example of servant leadership. I met their needs before I got my goal, which was a very different approach for me as being in the leadership role of a provider. After this clinic day, I started going home late though. And what happened was we had this feeling of a shared goal. We all had the vision that we'd go home on time, but we viewed it was all of our job to get the clinic ready for the next day, to get the patients out, and to get the patients roomed. All of a sudden, when I took on part of their role and served them, it made them have a greater buy-in to getting me out on time. And it changed. We had shared decision making. We had a shared vision of what our clinic day would look like and what the clinic flow would look like. And I want you to know this worked out so much better than I had anticipated. I think as a new provider, especially, it becomes really tempting to just say, because I said so, like, just let's work quicker and it's not my job to mop the floors. But when I changed my approach and I changed my viewpoint, I'm going to tell you, my staff has never worked with me harder. Having a shared model, a shared vision, and a form of servant leadership works well. And remember, having that shared vision where you put others' needs in front of yours is an example of a transformational leader. So ultimately, I feel like being a transformational leader does work better in turbulent environments. So theories described in the management leadership does not always translate directly to clinical practice. A congruent leader may be one that's more applicable to theory for clinicians, though. Congruent leaders is matching the clinical leader's actions and their values and beliefs about care and nursing. In this framework, the clinical nurses build on their capacity to be clinical leaders. This is an applicable model for many of you who are building on your current nursing practice to become advanced practice nurse practitioners. Clinical leadership is focusing on the patient first and building on working relationships to problem solve as part of an interprofessional team. All right, let's have another quick assessment question. Which of the following statements about a clinical leader is true? Usually described as being approachable and open. Think about the characteristics of a clinical leader typically include being approachable and open, having strong values and beliefs that are displayed in their practice, being effective communicators, role models, and decision makers, and being visible and clinically competent. They focus on the patient first and on building working relationships to problem solve as part of an interprofessional team. I want you to take a moment to compare transformational leaders with a clinical leader. What characteristics between these two leadership styles are the same, and what characteristics differ? I'm going to outline a couple of them for you in this lecture. Transformational leaders, they model the way. They inspire a shared vision. Remember how I talked about when I had those medical assistants and I had a vision of everyone going home on time? I shared this vision by helping them get home on time. That's a shared vision in clinical practice. They challenge the process and enable others to act and encourage the heart. So if you think about this, by sharing with them my vision, I enabled them to be quicker, and overall, I encouraged us all to get home on time. When we think about clinical leaders, it's going to differ from the transformational leaders by not exhibiting the same creativity and vision described in the transformational model. So clinical leaders are going to focus on the patient first and build work relationships to problem solve. They're approachable and open, however, and they have strong values and beliefs that are displayed in their practice. They are effective communicators, role models, decision makers, and are visible and clinically competent. So both leaders share in some qualities but differ in others. And when I think of the transformational model leader as the one who shares a vision, while the clinical leader is the one who's very competent and builds around the patient's needs. When you think about your practice as an advanced nurse practitioner, who do you envision yourself being? Or do you think there'll be situations that you're the clinical leader and situations where you're a transformational leader? And I think there's times as a clinician that I have been both. And I hope as a leader that you can change your leadership style towards the needs of the unit. And I think that's a challenge, but I think that makes the most effective leaders. A frame is a composite of beliefs and assumptions that are used to navigate the world. In an organization, they help with problem solving and getting things done. I want you to view the frames as actually like sunglasses, or the way we envision and how we look through our institutions. There are 4 frames to view your organization. The first one is structural. The second is human resources. Third, political, and fourth, symbolic. Think of the frame as the colored lenses you view the organization. Let's talk about the structure frame, which will focus on an organization's circumstances, goals, rules, technology, and environment. This basically is an organizational chart to how the work is distributed in an organization environment. This is basically an organizational chart to how everybody's role is going to be and how your work distribution will look like. As your role changes to advanced practice role, think of how your role in the structural framework will change. How will the work distribution change? I think of how my own role in the structure of the hospital I work has changed. I was once a medical assistant, and I was in charge of cleaning rooms, taking vitals, and following directions of the nurses. As a nurse, my work changed to interpreting information from the medical assistants and following direction from the providers. As a provider, my role has changed from gathering information to interpreting and informing and forming a treatment plan based off the information gathered from the nurses. So within the structure of my company, as I have changed my role, my workload and also my job has changed. The human resource frame will focus on the alignment of human and organizational needs. As a leader, you will either invest in your people or be lean and mean. Organizations that are able to engage employees and connect them to meaningful work are most successful. As a provider, I worked at Planned Parenthood, which is definitely a lean and mean organization. The staff was engaged and encouraged to be part of the company goal of providing family planning to women. However, there is not a lot of time or extra resources to actually invest into the staff. However, the connection that staff had for this shared goal is what attribute their success. So while they have a limited budget and they are lean and mean, they are able and don't always invest in human resources. That transformational leadership that type of organization had was enough to carry it through to being successful in its goals. Let's talk about the political frame. This redefines an organization as coalitions into which individuals or groups are competing for scarce resources. Let me tell you, all healthcare organizations are competing for scarce resources. They are competing for insured patients. For example, Planned Parenthood was a Title X facility that competes with other Title X facilities for government funding. Recently, they lost their Title X status under the current administration, which makes it so that they lost federal funding. This change in the political frame decreases their ability to compete for funds. So political change within an organization can actually change its ability to practice. The symbolic frame focuses on meaning and that is perceived by the individual or group. Symbols are created often in times of uncertainty. Organizations can create symbols. For example, in the state of Utah, the Planned Parenthood uses a symbol of a fighting bee to represent protecting the beehive, because Utah is known as a beehive state. It is a way to get support and within the community. It is a way to symbolically get people to get behind providing women with reproductive resources, and it basically gets resources to the clinic. As they sell merchandise that say protect the hive or protect the beehive state, they're using this symbol to compete for scarce resources within community and get people to unite within a common cause behind a symbol. So to help learn these frameworks, I think it's a good idea to just create a 2-sentence description for each framework as discussed in the text. So if you think about it, I first started with the human resource, with how we invest, the political framework with how the politics will affect an organization. Symbolic would be an example of the honeybee. And then also structural is how the organization is structured and how we separate power and rules within a community and within the healthcare system. Let's take a quick moment to have a knowledge check. Which structural frame focuses on realigning organizations as coalitions? So that would be political. If you remember the example, the political one changes, like for example, the Planned Parenthood losing their Title X funding. it redefines their political status, redefines their ability as a coalition to compete with other Title X groups for funding. So this is an example that the political frame will redefine an organization as a coalition, which individuals and groups are competing for scarce resources. And I think Planned Parenthood is a great example because it is highly political, but to be honest with you, all organizations within healthcare are going to have an element of politics behind how they compete for resources within our current healthcare model. When we think of leadership, we also need to view it in the framework of emotional, social, and cognitive intelligence. Personal competencies focus on the self and include self-awareness and self-management as a leader. Think of the strength of a leader who can make a personal inventory of their strengths and weaknesses in comparison to leaders who do not have this insight. Self-management requires us to control our emotions. Leaders who have this skill are often seen as adaptable. So think about the leader who tries something, like when I tried something early on with my medical assistants where I tried education and I recognized that what I was trying didn't work. That insight and my interventions not making a difference with that group is what allowed me to adapt to trying a servant modelship. So this is a good skill in a leader. It's adapting to the situation. So basically, when what you try at first doesn't work, try again. When we think about emotional intelligence, this is a skill where the leader is able to inspire others to be effective. This differs from personal competencies because it's the ability to improve the abilities of those you lead. So think about personal competency as my insight, where I can adapt my own leadership styles to the needs of those around me. But an emotional intelligence is the ability to improve those around you. And I think this is a great skill for leaders. Cognitive intelligence is the ability of a leader to see patterns that are emerging and the ability to use systems. And they think and basically understand patterns. This type of leader may be invaluable in forming systems to improve hospital outcomes like clinic flow. I want to tell a short, quick story about someone in my organization who had great cognitive intelligence. One of the doctors noticed a problem. In the hospital I work at, we have a problem with flow. Basically, we started just medical inductions at 39 weeks, but also just inductions at 39 weeks for women who just didn't want to be pregnant. And basically, they were all showing up with long, thick cervixes that were not favorable for an induction, causing an 18-hour labor. So labor and delivery would be full of women who are actively laboring, and then I'd be trying to admit patients who are actively laboring, and we'd have nowhere to put actively laboring patients because we were full of inductions. So one of our physicians came up with a really good solution. He's a good cognitive leader because of this. His solution was that the patients would show up the day of their induction to clinic. And then basically they would have what's called an NST. And in the world of labor and delivery, that is just a quick fetal monitoring to ensure that baby's doing well. And then if baby was doing well, they'd place a balloon, which is a catheter that causes pressure on both sides of the cervix to manually dilate them. And they'd be sent home. Well, these balloons will fall out around 4 centimeters. And so what happens now is women come to clinic for an appointment, have a fetal monitoring, have a balloon placed, and they go home and they come back to the hospital when the balloon's fallen out. And so they're showing up to labor and delivery out of 4. And this is shortening the time period that they're at labor and delivery so that we're not having women stuck on labor and delivery between the dilations of 1 to 5 for 8 hours. But we're able to expedite the induction process by doing some of it at home. So this doctor had the ability had the cognitive intelligence basically to see the patterns that weren't working and think of another pattern that solved it. So as a hospital, we're still able to provide elective inductions, which are very popular. And remember, we are all competing for resources, right? So as an organization, we compete for these patients who don't want to wait for labor, but we're able to do it in a way that still works with clinic flow. So all of these leadership styles really are applicable to the healthcare world. As you are in practice, I think you'll see different ways that some of these didactic theories are applied. In the structural theorist model, power focuses on authority. The leader makes a decision and then monitors whether the followers carry out the directive. In this situation, power is given because of the leader's control over resources. The human resources theorist changes this concept of power to empowerment. Empowerment fits more appropriately with today's culture also. Historically, power has been viewed in a negative light. Power can be both negative and positive, however, depending on how it is accessed and used. In the new age, power is needed by leaders in building relationships to get results. Think back to leaders with emotional intelligence having more power in this framework. there are various sources of power. These sources can come from one's position, persona, reputation, expertise, or from just being coercive and controlling. Legitimate authority is a product of influence and acceptance by a group of people. For example, a new provider may have the role of leader but not have legitimate authority since they have not yet earned acceptance by those they lead. Through time and through proving their skill sets, though, this can also be earned. Leaders who influence others can help to motivate by creating a shared vision and purpose. This is the environment that change can happen. This type of influence empowers those around the leader to perform at their very best. This is a partnership where both the leader and the follower depend on each other for success. Complexity science will look at a relationship between and among all things and defines the nature of the relationship by its actions and impact. Think of healthcare as a coalition of individual agents who have the freedom to act in ways that are not always predictable and whose actions are interconnected, such that one agent's actions change the context of another agent. In this model, there is much flexibility. The leader goes from hero to host. A hosting leader provides good group resources and processes for people to work together. It provides the resource of time. Basically, it creates a group that accomplishes difficult work together. Chaos is also a component to change. It is the catalyst of change. In a healthy system, change is constant, creating space for new interactions, structures, and patterns that will be formed. So when you think of a chaotic day at the hospital, oftentimes it is just time to have a key component to change. This will help us change and refine our processes within our clinical institutions. I want you to think of ways in your own practice you can be a leader who acts as a host. One way I work as a leader in my clinical practice is providing feedback to staff on a regular basis. Phrases like, I like how you started that IV, you are doing well, or even providing my time, such as, is there anything I can do to help? I find when I give my time to my staff on all levels, it changes the work environment. When the provider takes the time to clean stretchers, everybody on the team will up their game. Change is a dynamic journey. It is everywhere and needs to be embraced. Leaders bear the responsibility to translate change for the followers, be the early adopter of any new program, and model comfort with ambiguity, with it being fuzzy, basically. When there is change, often there are those who resist. This may be due to perceived changes in vision or values proposed by the change. Leaders can help create a vision for the change and why it is key for success. Leaders can also do the 4 Ds: discovery, dream, design, and destiny. During the discovery phase, this will focus on what qualities the organization does best. And then the dream phase is going to explore what it could or should look similar to. And the design phase is the new norms, values, and structures and patterns that emerge. And the destiny is the phase of transformation where this will occur. I'd like to give you an example from my own clinical practice. We're currently adopting a new communication phase at work. And this is one of those examples where there's something new and there's low buy-in. So as a leader on the unit, one of my goals is to add a lot of buy-in by sharing my vision. So I try to do this by first having a discovery phase. I talk about the ways that we already communicate well because we're doing a new communication system. So helping them be like, we communicate well as an organization this way. I like the way you page me when a patient has a status change. I think we do great in helping talk with each other. During the dream phase, I explore what this communication could be similar to. So I like the fact that you always page me when we have a change of status change. I wonder what it would be like under the new system where you can text me their chart. I think it takes something you already do well, but builds on it, making it even better. I think this new system will improve that communication. During the design phase, we learn about the new norms and structures. The design phase are the classes that they're showing to how to use the new smartphones that increase the communication. It's the time where we basically teach staff what this looks like before we go live. And then when we look at it, the destiny phase is the implementation of the new communication program. And this is the go live phase. So there's 2 things you can do as a leader in this role. You can complain with the staff about how hard it is to lose a new system, or you can send this message. First, I like how we communicate. You do well communicating with me. Second, I think we can communicate better, however, with this new technology. You will have the ability to page me a patient's chart, and I can look over it from anywhere in the hospital. this will be better. Third, we go to the classes and we learn how to implement the new knowledge and what that looks like in our institution. And finally, with the destiny phase, our organization will implement these new changes. I think with healthcare, there's so many changes. So not just my institution, I think all of you guys can think about having a new EMR system, a new way to scan medications, a new way to send electronic, send your medications to the pharmacy. There's always going to be change to make things better. And you can be the early adopter to help share a vision. And remember, whenever you're sharing vision as a leader, you're being a transformational leader. And I think that is always a great example of using transformational leadership style within the change of healthcare. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we can make a difference in healthcare. First, let's talk about learning organizations. These ones are improving quality and create a competitive environment. There are 5 disciplines of a learning organizations: personal mastery, shared vision, team learning, mental models, and system thinking. It's important to strive as advanced practice nurses to align yourself in a learning organization, especially when you're first out of practice. Innovation is required to change our future models to one of a health and wellness instead of a disease management. Our current healthcare system is going to require a lot of innovation. We want to change to a model that is health management, not disease management. Advanced practice nurses need to lead as they look for opportunities and innovations to propel them forward in this new mental model. One way advanced practice nurses can do this is to use disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation challenges the leaders to provide a more convenient and less expensive alternative to underserved customers. It is the future of our healthcare systems. Basically, guys, we have to have disruptive innovators to provide healthcare at a lower cost and give healthcare to more people. One way to do this is to utilize a blue ocean strategy. The strategy is used to grow demand and break away from the competition. The success of the strategy is that it focuses on the differentiation of services and provides care at a low cost. Think of a type of a solution an advanced practice nurse can do to lower costs in healthcare while also offering care at a lower cost. When I think about this, I actually think about birth control. In the state of Utah, one of the things that's interesting is birth control can be prescribed now by a pharmacist who's seen an OB-GYN in the last 2 years. And this is a way that it breaks a certain demographic away from competition. And it's also offering more women birth control at lower costs because the pharmacist is just renewing their script there without an out-of-office visit. Now, there are some requirements on this. These are low-risk women. They're also women who've seen a gynecologist within 2 years or a midwife. To ensure that they are getting their cancer preventative services. But also for a basically healthy patient who had a PAP, who doesn't have anything due and doesn't have a breast exam due, this is a great option. It lowers costs. It's a great example of breaking away part of the market. Instead of competing with gynecologists, the pharmacists aren't competing. They're just breaking away that part of the market that desires birth control that are low risk. And they're offering more birth control basically in the state of Utah to women everywhere. So this is just an example of using the blue ocean strategy in common healthcare. All right, finally, let's talk about the entrepreneur. This is a person who organizes and operates a business or businesses. They take on greater than normal financial risk in order to do so. In contrast, the intrapreneur, think about looking inward, works within an existing business or company. The intrapreneur is a manager within a company who promotes innovation, products, and develops and marketing. What do you see yourself as? I think this would depend on how much risk you are okay with and your risk aversion. Those who can take on a little bit more risk are going to be more the entrepreneurs because they're going to take more personal risk and also have more personal gain. The intrapreneur is probably more risk adverse, but they're also going to be someone who can make changes within the healthcare system, not taking on so much risk, but also still having the ability to move and grow within the organization. Networking is the exchange of information or services among individual groups or institutions. Have you heard the old adage, it's not what you know, but who you know? This old adage can be true when it comes to the new graduate landing a new job. And also it comes to institutions promoting themselves within a community. Remember that we are all competing for scarce resources. So when you think about us in our political view, remember that political framework where we compete with each other. You're going to think about social networking because if you think about some of the ways we do that, some of the organizations in my area have Facebook pages that they show patients who just had babies. That's fun. We like to see people having babies. That's fun, and it's a good way to promote a hospital, right? So the happiest things people do at a hospital for the most part. And also social networking is another way that you can join professional organizations and use social media for getting a job. So I want to tell a quick story about one of the students I had last semester. This student graduated in a very harsh market. She was working very, very rural medicine. Everybody knew everybody, and she just moved into this market. And basically, even with the students I'd had in this market, they'd pick a nurse that they knew they were going to promote, and this community would promote them, and they'd get the advanced practice role, and she moved into it. And so she had no reasons to be successful. Well, she social networked. She became part of a Facebook page for one of the institutions, and basically helped out a ton, joined their organization, and became using social marketing more of an integral structure within the healthcare community, and eventually landed a job. So networking is key, especially as a new graduate, to making sure that your face is out there, your name's out there, and you're advertising yourself. Companies are advertising, but we advertise also. Mentoring. This is a planned relationship between an experienced person and one with less experience for the purpose of achieving identified outcomes. Many of you have had this relationship type by both training a new nurse, and you've probably been in a point in your career where you've been the mentor and the mentee. I feel like I've been in both roles. Even as a practitioner who's in the middle of my career, I still look up to certain providers and try to have a mentor-mentee relationship where they can help me grow and where I can always challenge myself to do better, especially for me in the learning aspect with teaching. I feel like I'm always finding somebody who I feel like teaches well and trying to grow in that aspect so that I can do better and be a better instructor. And then also when it comes to being a mentor, it's a great experience to use those skills you've had and pay it forward. I find in the areas that I mentor also, I grow the most. So I really am a big fan of this mentor relationship. All right, so to end this lecture, I want you to think about the type of nursing leader that you want to be. And then I want you to think of one who has changed the field. One for me that comes to mind that is so cliche, but she was amazing, is Florence Nightingale. She was an early adopter of change within the healthcare system, and she was able to have a transformational vision of what it would be. And part of this was, if you think back in the day, hospitals were dreary, dark, not clean, no air, and that's what it looked like. And she thought this caused infection, and so she started to open up the windows, clean, and she stopped infection, which was one of the reasons they had such a lower rate of death when she started practice. Another thing is she was a service leader. During some of the wars, she went and served on the front line. That's where she learned her medicine. As a leader, when I think about who I want to be a service leader. Ultimately, I think that causes the greatest amount of change is a shared vision and the ability to serve those that you want to lead. It's a different model than in the past, but I think as it comes to healthcare, it's a paradigm shift. If you think about when I started medicine in the olden days, I used to work with a surgeon. He would just show up, and I had this role. It was to get him a cup of coffee. He would show up to the station, and I'd have to have a cup of coffee ready for him. And there was no co-management, and he ran by just, this is my role and this is what when I think about now, when I go to the station and I'm in the leadership role as a nurse practitioner, it's different. I want to show up and have a shared decision-making model. I want to help those who work under me work at the top of their license. I want to have that type of an emotional maturity as a leader that they do their best. And then I want to use service in my leadership style. So it's a paradigm shift. When you re-listen to this lecture or listen to this lecture and read your chapters, I want you to kind of think about your future career as a nurse practitioner. And I want you to, or an advanced practice nurse or an educator or a psychiatric nurse. There's just such a wealth of students we have in this course. I want you to think about how you can learn from these paradigms and be the influential leader that you see yourself seeing as an advanced practice nurse. Thank you guys so much for your time.